Okay, we're back at the Four Corners looking south on Huron Avenue at the 200 block. And as we go a little bit closer here, we'll see, well, let's look at the east side first. Before we get into individual stores, let's just look at and see how this block has changed over the last century or so. Over 100 years ago, probably in the late 1800s, it looked something like this. Notice the facades along the higher buildings on the roof line. Over the years, that'll change. Notice in this postcard from about 1900, you can see the streetcar tracks going down the center, but you also see that the street is dirt. Of course, the horseless carriage hadn't come into vogue yet, so yeah, this was ideal for the horses. In this postcard, you can see bricks on Huron Avenue, and of course that may be because the cars were starting to come into style. It looks like you can see one here at the west side toward the end of Huron. Also notice that the roof line hasn't changed in this picture, but you'll see that it has changed, especially on this first building in the next one. This postcard looks like it might have been taken in the Roaring 20s. Notice that the street is now paved, and also the roof line on the top of this first building has been removed. Probably a liability issue, just like they were removed later on in all the stores, because they started to crumble and, I imagine, fall on pedestrians. This postcard, probably from the early 50s, is the downtown Port Huron that I remember, with two of my favorite 5 and 10s in the same block, Kresge's and Newberry's. These next two pictures was taken from 1982. And of course you can notice that all the tops have been gone, removed completely from the buildings, and they went through a period where the facades were covered with metal sheeting. Firestone did, Hague did here, and several other stores did, and of course at the time we thought that was pretty wonderful. But in retrospect, there's nothing like seeing an original historic building. That's why I appreciate what Port Huron's done to restore some of these old buildings. You can see that the roof line has changed, but the buildings remain the same for the most part. And one of the ways you can tell this is because of the windows. Windows don't lie. You can usually cover them up or board them up, but they're still there. Part of them is. And you'll see in this next slide that you can see the difference, the comparison. When you're trying to compare current buildings with earlier buildings to see if they're the same, it helps to have unusual focal point that you can identify. And I think the focal point here are these three round windows that you see trimmed in blue on the left. But you can see they're the same windows as they were 100 years ago. And as you go down the line, you can see the next two on the top have been taken out, but you can see where they were. And then the three and so forth. It's always exciting for me to see a current building and realize that a century ago that this is the same building. There are several buildings like this in Port Huron that you wouldn't expect to be as old as they are. This is the Kresge store that the folks from my generation remember the best. It was on the corner of Grand River and Huron, and we've already looked at it in our first video. But there is something I'd like to share with you about SS Kresge's. First of all, it was the founder's name, Sebastian Spurring Kresge. And the Kresge store was around for a long time on this corner, as you can tell from this picture. In 1897, Kresge started with James McCrory, the founder of McCrory's 5 and 10 cent stores in Memphis, Tennessee. He continued in this for 2 years, then in 1899, founded his company with his brother-in-law, Charles Wilson, with an $8,000 investment in two 5 and 10 cent stores, one in downtown Detroit, which Kresge ran, and the other one in Port Huron, which Wilson ran. But the store in Port Huron wasn't this store. It was actually on the opposite end of the block right next to Valentine, or really it was part of the Valentine building. Both stores were under the name of Kresge and Wilson, and in this 1904 directory you can see it listed under Bizarre Goods. 5 and 10-cent goods became so popular that Mr. Kresge was encouraged to open stores in key cities throughout the country. In 1907 he bought out his brother-in-law, Wilson, and changed the name of the firm to S.S. Kresge. Here's where that first store was located in Port Huron, and it must have been after 1907 because you can see by the signage that it's called S.S. Kresge Company. And once again we look at the windows above the store to find out the exact placement today. Kresge occupied the width of 3 windows of the end of the Valentine building. Also look at the eave at the very top of this building. It went all the way across the complete building, but today you see that it doesn't. You can see by this current picture here where the Kresge store was at. And you can also see the eave only goes across the last 4 windows of the building now, where at one time it went all the way around it. I'm kind of surprised that it's still there. Yes, this is an historic building. It's been around a long time. In the 80s, it was Household Finance Company, a loan company. And there were a lot of loan companies during that period of time and earlier in Port Huron. There was Associate Loan Company, Beneficial Finance Company, Household Finance Company, Goldie's Loan Office, Pacific Finance Company, Public Loan Company. All these loan companies basically had a higher rate of interest. They took on the marginal customers that the banks rejected. But soon they faded away too. You just don't see them much anymore. But this is a business that I remember on that corner when I was growing up, the Valentine Dry Goods Company. And it was there for a lot of years, before I was even born. Here's an aerial view looking down on Valentine. And this advertisement says the spring stock at Valentine's comprises everything new in dress goods and suitings, silks, satins, cashmere, ottoman cords, plaids, and stripes. Don't fail to see the new goods at S.B. Valentine and Company. In this full-page ad that advertises their new spring line, on the left you see the normal advertisement for Valentine, but on the right you see a little history tidbit about the Washington Monument. And then it goes on to tell you that little tidbit was brought to you by Valentine. Also on the left there's a nice little sketch of their building. Of course it's going the wrong way, so I cropped that out and I'll show it to you the right way. And it's kind of interesting. It also went on to say you could get a good working suit for $3 and a really nice dress suit for $12. There's that sketch I was telling you about. This photo here, probably in the early 1900s, it appears that Nils Drugs shared the store of Valentine's. When I looked at some of these pictures with Nils Drug in them, I thought they took over the whole store, but according to the city directories, Valentine's always shared the building with Nils and then eventually took over the whole building. Nils Drugs was locally famous for their red, white, and blue pills, a cure for all that ails you. The red pills for pale and weak people to restore their health, strength, and beauty. The white pills is a great liver invigorator and a bowel regulator and a system renovator. You can work while they work. They never gripe or make you sick. The blue pills cure urinary and kidney troubles, lame or sore back, backache, etc. Only 25 cents a box, or 5 for $1. According to this ad, it looked like whatever space they had available, they rented it out. Here we have the gallery of art over the Valentine building and one of the compartments up there, one of the rooms. And it also looks like part of that partnership of Marsh and Brown was also an attorney there, as you can see from the bottom left-hand corner. Silas Ballantyne was born in New Brunswick in 1845. He was 12 when his family moved to Michigan and bought a farm at Old Brockway between Avoca and Yale. Farm life didn't agree with him. He ran away from home, and while one of his brothers soon found him, the family allowed the youngster to move to Elmont, where he took a job as a store clerk and enrolled in high school. At 15, Ballantyne moved to Port Huron and took a job as a clerk with Wallace and Gibson's store. He remained there after the store was bought by Charles Noyes, who later made him a partner. In 1867, Ballantyne and his brother David bought the store. David died 7 years later. That was a heavy blow for Silas. You can see by this business card that the SL and D Ballantyne, SL was Silas, middle initial L, and then D would have been David, as you can see above there. And I always thought that this first store that they bought was on the corner where Ballantyne's has always been. That's where I just figured it was, and found out by looking at some very old directories that the first store they bought was actually on the southeast corner, which would have been across the street, right about here. And the address shown on the card is number 2 Huron Avenue. And in one of the early directories it says it was on the north end of the bridge. This was verified by the earliest picture we have of Port Huron. If you look at this building right here, you can see it's owned by C.P. Noyes, who was actually Charles Noyes, who was the fellow that made Silas his partner, and later sold the store to Silas and his brother David as the first Ballantyne store. Colonel Wellington Davis, one of Port Huron's original developers, built what became known as the Davis Block on the northeast corner of Huron Avenue and Quay Street. And this was in the 1840s. It's said that fire destroyed the Davis Block in March of 1875. And Ballantyne, who sold furniture, clothing, shoes, and other dry goods on the southeast corner, bought the ruins of the Davis Block and built a new store that opened in October 1875, which is the store that you see here, and is also the store that you see today. So it's a very historic building. Silas Ballantyne and his wife Carolyn lived on the corner of 7th and Court Street. Grand old house is still there today, just across an alley from the former Victorian Inn. The Ballantyne house is probably one of the oldest homes in Port Huron. The home has been nicely restored today and gives you an idea of what it looked like back then. These are some pictures that were taken on the last home tour there. Alright, let's go to the first building north of the Ballantyne building. Keep in mind that the Ballantyne building, the windows there was 9 of them that face Huron Avenue. The last three northern windows would have been where Kresge was. And the building next to that, which was Advanced Care Pharmacy in 2009, at one time held Ardent's, that you see here in the early 1980s. And again, looking at the windows, they've broken the Ballantyne building up. Those last 4 northern windows houses another business. When I was growing up, I think it had the True Value stamps there for a while store. And now it looks like Ardent's has kind of taken that over, and if you look closely, you can see I think there's like 4 display windows there. And before that, at one time, I know like in 1957, I think, was a Jane Lee store there as well. And back in the 1920s, it was a Woolworths store, Woolworths in McBriar. It was before they moved their store over to the corner of Grand River and Huron. If you have 20/20 vision, you can just barely make out the F.W. Woolworth store right next to Kresge's. Little competition there. In our next video, we'll see if we can't finish up the east side of the 200 block of Huron Avenue.